All right, well, good morning. It is a beautiful Sunday morning. It's Easter morning. Matter of fact, we've had a busy couple of weeks. Lots going on, and I really haven't had a chance to do much filming. The few days I was able to get in here and work on things, I just really, to be honest, didn't really want to fool with the camera and talking and any of that. I just wanted to put my head down and go to work. So let me catch you up on the progress I made over the last couple of weeks since the last episode, since I filmed last, and we'll go from there. One of the bigger items that you might notice is this mock-up LS engine. I got that from Speedway Motors, and it's super handy. I got the long, they sell it in two different versions. They have a short block version, which doesn't come with the heads, and then they have a long block version. So if you buy the short block version and you've got a set of heads, you can bolt up your own heads to it. I decided to get the long block version just because it's super lightweight and easy to deal with. This thing I think is invaluable because I don't have to worry about trying to stick the real genuine engine in and out every time I want to mock things up. And I found out already a couple of things. The engine mounts that I mocked up have already moved around a little bit because I've done some welding on the chassis, and that sort of solidified my thinking of I need to go ahead and weld the entire chassis up solid before I finish up engine mounts and things like that. What I did already with the engine mounts is it's still not all for naught. It's not all for naught. Not all for naught. It's still a good thing because it helps me position the engine front to back. There's really no side to side because it's so tight with the headers, but it helps me position the engine front to back, and I know where the engine's going to be, so I can mock up other things all around it. But what I'm driving at, what I'm trying to say is the last thing I will do is weld in the engine mounts, because the chassis will move around quite a bit as you do all the finish welding. And there's quite a bit more bracing and lacing that needs to go in here that needs to be finish welded as well. And you know, when you weld stuff, it's amazing how much metal moves around, shrinks and pulls and does all kinds of crazy stuff. So the very last thing you should be doing is welding in your drivetrain mounts, and no different, that's the case here. So that's that one thing. The other thing I did was I got these lower frame rail tubes all in place where I want them, checked angles. I trimmed this nose back quite a bit. If I was going to race this car, the nose is just inside of the front tire, and we'll have to put some sort of a little sacrificial bumper just per the rules. You need to have a bumper that sticks out past your tires for nerfing. And I know that with this chassis, I don't know that I'm going to race it. Never say never, but if a person was going to race it, you just have to add on an accessory sacrificial bumper, which is not really a problem. The other thing I also did was I went ahead and I got this driver's side hood tube notched and in place. It's just sitting in there. I haven't final notched it. I'm still a little bit gappy in some areas on this notch down in here. I want this a little bit tighter, and I've got some room for improvement there. But I did get this done. It took me, I think, all collectively to do this notch, which is majority by just hand with a grinder and by eyeball. It probably took me a couple hours just to do this one notch. I think what I might do today, and we'll see how this goes, is I might do a step-by-step on this one, because I still got to do the passenger side tube here. And so I might film that step-by-step. Some of you guys wanted to know how I notch tubes that meet into rolled and radius tubes. I'm going to see if I can kind of show you how I go about notching this tube. The other thing I'm kind of contemplating and what I'm going to do is I think what I need to do next is get my drive shaft parts. I need to get a carrier bearing. I need to get parts to make up a final drive shaft and figure out where that carrier bearing needs to live front to back to maximize droop. Once I get that kind of figured out and make sure my driveline angles are happy, then I will know for certain what length shocks I can run. Because if I find that I can't make a driveline angle happy at full droop running a 16, there's no sense in buying a 16-inch shock. If you can't use all that travel, there's no sense in spending the extra money to buy that longer shock. So I want to do that so I can get shocks ordered and move on to finishing out front shock mount and lacing or bracing, whatever you want to call it. There's quite a few tubes in here that need to be added. These window bar V-tubes need to come in. I've got some 1.5 inches for that. And then from there, bracing going down into these corners, bracing coming forward, lots of stuff. So lots of work to do, but it's a nice day. Good day to work on the chassis. So here we go. All right, so one of the very first things I do when I'm notching any tube, unless it's a very, very simple, straightforward angle like a 45 or a 90, is I'll lay the tube up against wherever the tube intersection is going to be, and I mark an approximate angle, top and bottom. So whether you're going to be notching a tube by hand, whether you're going to be notching a tube, when I say by hand, it's like with a grinder and a cutoff wheel, or whether you're going to be notching a tube using like a benchtop hole saw type tube notcher, you need to know the approximate angle of what the notch is going to be. So what I do is I write a line across there using the intersecting tube as a reference. So see with this pin, I'll just write it, running the pin alongside this intersecting tube. So I get sort of an approximate angle of what I need. And you want to do this on both sides of the tube if possible, because when you go to turn it over, sometimes you're going to have to turn it over. You're only going to be able to run it in your tubing notcher a certain way, because your tubing notcher will only achieve, an angle on this side of the tube. So hopefully I'm explaining that right to where you can understand. Those of you that have used tubing notchers know what I mean. Right here, I have an approximate angle of what I need. I've already got the tubing notcher set to this angle because I've already done this tube. However, because this is on the opposite side, the tube is going to need to be turned over because it's a mirror of this notch over here. So that's the first thing I do, is I go and I establish an initial angle, take it over to my bench notcher or hole saw type notcher. And the one I have here is the JD Square Notchmaster. This one has been great. I've tried another one, but I find this one here has been the best. I've got the Swag off-road reach around option, so I can get different offsets and more severe notches. And what that does is it allows you to swing this a lot further than the stock, and then it allows this bearing block to be slid up and down on this arm, which the Notchmaster, the way it comes from the factory, doesn't have that option. So back to this. I've already got these lines in here. I've got a line on the underside too. So I'm gonna get my initial notch using the Notchmaster over on the bench. From there, I'm gonna start doing all the handwork because, like I said before, there's no straightforward notch here because everything is coming into a radius tube. If these tubes were straight, if these were a straight tube and it was a regular straight angle, you could probably get away with doing most everything on the Notchmaster or a hole saw type notcher, but that's not the case here. And on top of that, not only do we have a notch, not only are we notching this tube into this rolled or radiused nose tube, we're also making a relief for this tube down here because it's coming in and making a node right here where the three tubes are coming together. So we're gonna go ahead and get after that. I'm gonna run this through the notcher and probably a little time lapse so you can kind of see what I do. I sit there, I'll be taking it and I'll be putting it on and off, comparing and checking my distance here. I'll just keep on creeping up on where I stop with the hole saw notcher and start with the hand grinder. And those that are new to metal fabrication, or maybe not new to metal fabrication, but new to tube work and tube notching, when you're using a grinder, and we use flap discs, right? Make sure that you wear a mask of some kind, a respirator, just a standard. I've got a little standard mask that I need to replace. I've done a lot of this without a mask, and now I am very sensitive to grinder dust. If I don't wear a mask for, say, one cut with a cutoff wheel or just a little bit of flap disc work, the next day I have a headache like crazy. So make sure you're wearing a mask. Save yourself the trouble and the sensitivity. It's not good for you. Wear a mask when you're using that grinder. All right, here we go. All right, so there's my initial hole saw notch, and I know I'm close to being on the correct plane as far as the way the notch is twisted this way. I'm close. However, right now it looks flat, and I'm gonna have to swing that tube down a little more. So it's gonna be, the notch is gonna be kicked up a little bit on the outside. Is that right? Yeah. It's pretty hard to explain, but the notch is gonna be kicked up on the outside a little bit, which is something I can fine tune with a grinder. So what I'm gonna do from here is, and the reason, or the way I established the way that hole saw needed to come in, the rotation of this tube, was I eyeballed right through here the way this tube is going to intersect through this tube, and I put a little X. Okay, so there's a little X here and a little X there. When you put it in the tubing notcher, the Notchmaster, you've got to rotate it and make sure that your horizontal plane of the hole saw is following about that same path. There's no other way for me to explain this that I know of, or maybe I'm not that great of explaining it, but that's what I do. That's what's always worked for me. So I have my X there. I've got my initial notch. And as this tube swings down a little bit, that notch angle is going to change. It's going to have to rotate a little bit. However, what I'm going to do is keep on nibbling away at this notch. I'm going to bring it back to, I don't know, somewhere in here. And then I'll start doing my work with the grinder by hand. Hole saw, probably to about here. Keep on checking it, back and forth, back and forth. That's what I'm gonna be doing. I'm not gonna move the camera this time. You saw me run the hole saw. I'm basically doing the same thing at this same angle, or maybe slightly different, sort of checking that as I go and making sure that angle is creeping up on, you know, the way I need it. And when I say angle, I mean the rotation of the notch, because the rotation of the notch is gonna have to be kicked like that a little bit, because that tube is going to swing down and be in behind this nose tube. I'll move the GoPro so you can see the entire picture here. All right, here we go. All right, so we are at the point now where I think we need to start doing adjustments by hand. I've got this cut back about as much as I want to cut it back with the actual hole saw notcher. So I'm going to get the flap disc and go to work on this. I need to get it to where I can start swinging it downward. So this underside is going to need to be peeled back, and I'm just going to start working it a little bit at a time and get it to where I can swing it down and start marking it for clearance around this bottom upright tube, and then obviously the radius in here. And then also need to make sure that the height that comes into this plane just follows the plane and comes into this tube from this direction, like that. All right, so I'm kind of at a point where I can force this tube down in and behind this. I don't want to obviously have to force it in. You never want to build something under tension where you have to force things together. However, what it's going to do is when I do force it in and push it down, it's going to give me reference points of where I'm contacting. You can kind of see right here where it's contacting. And then what it does is I just forced it down and pushed it, and it was hitting this tack weld right here. So now I know where I need to relieve this notch in order for it to come in and fit in here a little bit more easily, or to make it a more fitted joint, if you will. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. Yeah, but making progress. It's just a whole lot of looking, adjusting, eyeballing, and you can see this is not a conventional notch. It's not shaping up to be a conventional notch of any kind. But what you can do is with the grinder and being right here on top of the joint is, luckily this particular joint is on, you know, this tube where I can swing it up out of the way, grind on it, and then put it right back in place. It makes it pretty simple and pretty easy in that respect, instead of having to lift it out and take it somewhere else. And I just bring my whole setup right here next to this notch, so I'm not having to do a lot of back and forth, or up and down. I just realized I had this little rolling cart. A lot easier to stick the grinders on top of the rolling cart, come over here, do my grinding, stick the grinder back on top of the rolling cart. What I was doing is just sticking them on, or putting them down on the floor, and that's a whole lot of bending over, picking up, back and forth, you know what I mean? So just trying to be efficient in getting this notch done. All right, here we go. All right, so now we're kind of getting into the meat of things. I've got a small, see if I can get my camera in here. I've got a small relief in here. It's kind of dished out for this upcoming tube, right, or this up angled tube right here. And that little relief is sort of in the area where that tube is going to register in the bottom of the notch. Let's swing this back over here. And now it's getting easier to put in. That takes quite a bit of force to get it in. And you can see now, let's see if I can hold it. You can see now where it's contacting. So it's still not relieved enough to where it'll sort of stay down in there. And what it's doing is putting pressure on this nose tube and pushing everything out. But now we can sort of get an idea of where we need to relieve. So you've got an area right in here. So that's gonna kind of have to go in here a little bit. Over here. And what you can do is, as this gets closer, is you can use the tube as your guide to make your mark. It's kind of use the tube as a template to make your mark. As this thing gets closer and closer, and obviously I can swing this thing down or up to help me mark and eyeball the joint or these tubes for reference. So if I came in here and I just use this tube to mark the radius to give me a reference of where that tube is going to be, then I can swing this back over, and you can see there's my mark right there. That's sort of where it needs to be relieved for that upward tube. And then we eyeballed this to where it needs to be relieved for this nose tube right in here. And then I can start fine tuning this area. This area has got to be kind of in here. It's going to kind of have a little bit of a dish coming up and in, sort of like that. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll just keep on working and taking a little bit of material off these areas on the tube where I marked, and keep on swinging it down and putting it in place, and making sure as I go, checking fitment and marking and referencing areas that need to be relieved even more with a grinder to make that joint nice and tight. When I get this all done, I'm going to go through with the level, make sure I check this, make sure I'm square from the dash bar there, or the window bar. Make sure I'm square this way, front to back. I don't want these tubes to be, again, I don't want it to be pushing that tube out. I don't want it to be, you know, putting any pressure on that tube. You don't want to build something under tension, like I said. So, yeah. So here we go. All right, so what I did was I put a jack, and it's not really to put any tension on it, just to give this tube support, because as I'm pushing this tube down, what it's doing is it's pushing the nose tube down, because all this is just tacked in and there's no support under any of it. And instead of, you know, pushing this down and tweaking this and making this fit as this is getting pressure underneath it and pushing it down, I would rather have support underneath this frame rail so this stays in place and there's no flex to it. And I moved the GoPro for the time-lapse view. It was mounted right here and looking directly at the joint, but I moved it back over there because I need to be able to stand back and look at these tubes. So right now, I'm looking for symmetry. This right side tube, or driver side tube, is coming in. It looks to me like it's coming in inside of that upright or stinger tube, nose tube. And this tube is a little bit outside of it. So I want to make sure that there's symmetry there. And I'll measure crossways this way as well with the tape and make sure it's all symmetrical. The other thing I need to do is make sure that these nose tubes are level with each other. So where they fall on the back of this, let me zoom out a little bit. Where they fall on the back of this nose tube needs to be at the same level. Right now, this one's higher and this notch is not quite done yet. But we're getting down to the nut cutting here, where we're getting into the final stages of the notch. I can tell you right now, this in here needs to be relieved because it's rubbing right in here. To be able to bring this down a little bit, I'm gonna have to shorten up this ear on this to bring this tube down so it's falling at the same level, sort of in behind the nose tube. Right now it's kind of elevated up. And then this notch, or this relief in here, needs to be a little bit more. And the whole tube needs to be this way a little bit. Yeah, lots going on. It's pretty complicated, but it's not. And you're just doing the best you can. This is all handwork. This is not machine work. And you try to make it as symmetrical as you possibly can and make sure it passes the eye test. If you stand back and you take a look at it, you want to make sure the way these tubes fall in is generally the same on both sides, and it's symmetrical. This is by far not easy. This is my fourth chassis, so I've done it a few times, but I learn something new every time I do it and get a little bit better every time I do it. So here we go. And then now I'm standing back and taking a look at it, and it looks pretty good. The only thing that I don't care for right now. And these tubes aren't even, they're not even tacked in place yet, but I need to get these leveled out. I can definitely tell that this passenger side tube is higher across this way. So that's what we're working on now. It's just fine tuning everything coming together here. It's a lot. It's a lot going on here. So I think we're going to call that a wrap. I do think that the GoPro died, so it didn't probably catch some of the stuff I did here. Got this other tube, this other hood line tube done. Got the two window bars in, this window V, and started working on the lacing or the bracing. So this tube here goes from this up corner node just underneath the A-pillar and down onto the backside of the tube for the engine mount. So that's what that's for. That's gonna brace the backside of that engine mount. And then there will be, so I got both sides done. I'm pretty OCD about doing both sides and getting things symmetrical and done. So those are done. They're just tacked in. And then there'll be a tube that goes from underneath the window V into that tube, and then from on the other side of that down to the A-pillar post. And that'll be your lacing or bracing for that area. So if there's a rollover, it's gonna carry the load down from the roof line to these window V tubes into a tube that goes to there, and then another tube that goes down into there. And then of course you've got this tube here that is bracing up where the motor mount tubes are on the other side of the frame rail. And that's a wrap for today. It's looking pretty good. Getting more tubes in there. Anyway, thanks for watching, you guys. Please like, subscribe, share, and we will see you on the next one. Oh, don't forget to go to the website and buy some Fab Everyday hats. I just put them up there, and a cup or something to support the channel. Appreciate it, guys. See you in the next one.